2 in the morning, the house drowning in the silence of grief. I lay beside the pillow that still held his shape from the day he died, when his phone, switched off for weeks, suddenly lit up. The sender was Doctor. The message wasn't a medical reminder, but whispered words of love. And from that moment, everything I thought I knew about our 35-year marriage shattered into pieces. My name is Nora Walker, and at 68 years old, I thought I knew everything about grief. 3 weeks had passed since David's funeral, and the coastal Oregon town we'd called home for 4 decades seemed to echo with his absence. The November rain tapped against our bedroom window like it always had, but now it felt like a countdown to nothing. I'd kept everything exactly as he left it. His reading glasses still perched on the stack of maritime history books on his nightstand. The indent from his head remained on his pillow, and I couldn't bring myself to smooth it away. His phone sat there too, powered off since the morning the paramedics arrived, when his heart finally gave out after years of warnings he'd cheerfully ignored. The house felt too large without him. Our Victorian on Lighthouse Road had been perfect for raising Michael and Lauren, but now its rooms yawned with emptiness. I'd taken to sleeping on the couch most nights, unable to face our king-sized bed alone. But tonight, exhaustion had driven me upstairs, and I'd collapsed fully clothed on my side of the bed, careful not to disturb his pillow. 2:23 a.m. The red digits on the alarm clock burned through the darkness when the impossible happened. David's phone buzzed, not once, but 3 times in succession, the screen casting an eerie blue glow across the photograph of us at Michael's wedding. My heart hammered as I reached for it, certain I was dreaming. The phone had been dead for weeks. I hadn't charged it, hadn't even touched it, but there it was, showing 15% battery, with notifications crowding the lock screen. Doctor. That's all the contact said. No first name, no last name, just Doctor. The preview of the latest message made my blood run cold. I can't stop thinking about that night in Portland. When can I see? With trembling fingers, I entered David's passcode, our anniversary date, 0715. The full conversation unfolded before me like a horror novel I couldn't stop reading. Missing your touch tonight. The hotel reservation is confirmed for Thursday. Tell her you have another conference. I love how you make me laugh. Can't wait to wake up next to you again. Message after message, stretching back months. The Thursday cardiology conferences in Portland, the weekend fishing trips with his brother Ted, who, I suddenly remembered, had called last month asking why David had canceled their annual salmon charter. I scrolled up, my eyes burning with tears I refused to let fall. There were photos. This doctor, a brunette who looked to be in her mid-50s, attractive in that polished way of successful professional women. Pictures of wine glasses clinking, of hands intertwined across restaurant tables, of David, my David, smiling in ways I hadn't seen in years. The room spun. 35 years of marriage, 2 children, 5 grandchildren, and countless memories. All of it felt like a lie. How many times had he kissed me goodbye before heading to these conferences? How many nights had I kept dinner warm while he was with her? I stumbled to the bathroom and vomited until nothing remained but bile and rage. When I finally looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Gray hair disheveled, face blotchy and swollen, wearing the same black dress I'd worn to his funeral, the grieving widow, the fool. Back in the bedroom, his phone continued to buzz. More messages from Doctor. David, please respond. I know this is complicated, but we promised we'd figure it out after you talk to her. I'm worried. You never go this long without... If you're having second thoughts about leaving her, just tell me. Leaving her, leaving me. I sank onto the bed, clutching the phone like evidence in a crime I was only beginning to understand. Outside, the lighthouse beam swept across the water as it had every night of our marriage, marking time in its reliable circle. But nothing felt reliable anymore. The man I'd buried 3 weeks ago, the one our friends called devoted, the one our children praised as the perfect father, had been planning to leave me for a woman named Doctor. And now he was gone, taking with him any chance for answers, for confrontation, for the fight we should have had. All that remained was me, his phone, and a woman out there who was waiting for responses that would never come. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. Doctor lighting up the screen at 2:47 a.m., the ringtone, one I'd never heard before, playing a song I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, my finger hovering over the answer button but unable to press it. Not yet, but soon. Because Nora Walker, the grieving widow, was already transforming into something else, something harder, something David had never seen in 35 years of marriage. I powered off the phone and placed it back on his nightstand. Tomorrow, I would begin learning everything about Doctor. Tonight, I would mourn not the man I'd lost, but the marriage I'd never actually had. Sleep never came. By 5:30 a.m., I was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee I couldn't taste, watching the gray Oregon dawn creep across the harbor. 40 years of memories played like a cruel slideshow in my mind, each one now tainted with the question, was this real, or was this part of the lie? I met David Walker in 1985 at Blackwell's Books, a cramped little shop near the university where I worked as a librarian. He'd literally bumped into me in the poetry section, sending my stack of Emily Dickinson tumbling to the floor. His hands shook as he helped gather the books, and his face turned the most endearing shade of red. "I'm usually much smoother than this," he'd said, then immediately winced. That sounded better in my head. I'd laughed, genuinely laughed. For the first time since my mother's death 6 months earlier, we talked for 3 hours that day, until Mr. Blackwell pointedly turned off the lights around us. David was finishing his residency at Oregon Health Sciences, cardiology, with dreams of opening a practice in a small coastal town. I was 28. He was 31, and by our third date, I knew I'd marry him. The wedding came 11 months later, small, intimate, just family and close friends at the Lighthouse Garden. David's hands were steady that time as he slipped the ring on my finger and promised to love me through every season of our lives. I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. Michael arrived 2 years later, Lauren 3 years after that. David was the father who never missed a school play, who taught them to ride bikes in the hospital parking lot after hours, who made pancakes shaped like hearts every Sunday morning. Our friends envied us. "You two are what marriage should be," they'd say. David would squeeze my hand and smile that private smile that made me feel like the only woman in the world. When did it change? I forced myself to think clinically, like a detective examining evidence. 5 years ago? 10? There had been shifts, subtle as tide changes. The way he started taking calls in his study with the door closed, the new interest in fitness, joining a gym at 63, buying clothes that seemed chosen by someone else, the conferences that increased from quarterly to monthly. "It's the new healthcare regulations," he'd explained, kissing my forehead as he packed another overnight bag. Everyone's scrambling to keep up. I'd been proud of his dedication. Proud. The word tasted bitter now. There were other signs I'd rationalized away, the separate credit card for business expenses, the password changes on his computer, the way he'd stopped reaching for me in bed, claiming exhaustion but staying up late texting. "Hospital emergencies," he'd say when I asked. The weekend trips with Ted that his brother knew nothing about. How many had there been? I pulled out my calendar and started counting, marking each lie with a red X. 15 in the last year alone. 15 times he'd kissed me goodbye and driven off to her. But it was the small betrayals that cut deepest as I remembered them now. The restaurant recommendations that came out of nowhere. We should try that new French place in Portland. Probably because he'd already been there with her. The sudden opinions about wine, about jazz, about things that had never interested him before. Was she teaching him? Changing him? Making him into someone I didn't recognize? I thought about our last anniversary in July, 35 years, and he'd seemed distracted through dinner at our favorite restaurant, the one overlooking the bay where he'd proposed. His phone buzzed constantly. "Sorry, honey, doctor. Peterson's having issues with the Henderson case." I'd reached across the table to take his hand, and he'd held it for exactly 3 seconds before pulling away to type another response. Was she texting him while he sat across from me? Was she waiting in a hotel room somewhere, checking the time, knowing he'd come to her after he'd played the dutiful husband for a few hours? The last time we made love, I had to think hard to remember. 3 months ago? 4? It had felt obligatory, mechanical, like he was checking off a box on a list. I'd attributed it to age, to stress, to the natural evolution of a long marriage. We have intimacy in other ways. I'd told my friend Susan when she delicately asked if everything was all right. The morning he died, he'd been rushing again, another conference, this time in Seattle. His bag was already in the car when the chest pains started. Just indigestion, he'd insisted, but his face was gray, sweat beading on his forehead. I'd called the ambulance over his protests, held his hand in the emergency room as the monitors screamed their warnings. His last words to me, "Tell the kids I love them." Not "I love you, Nora." Not "thank you for our life together." Just worry about the children, as if I were simply the mother of his offspring, not the woman he'd promised to cherish. Now I wondered, had he been going to her? Was she waiting in Seattle, checking her phone, wondering why he hadn't arrived? Did she come to the funeral? I tried to remember every face in that crowded church, but they blurred together in a haze of black clothing and sympathetic murmurs. The coffee was cold now, but I didn't care. Somewhere in Portland, a woman called Doctor was probably getting ready for work, checking her phone, wondering why her lover had gone silent. She had stolen pieces of my husband I'd never even known were missing. But worse than that, she'd made me complicit in my own deception. Every trusting smile, every unquestioned lie, every night I'd slept peacefully while he planned his escape. The woman I'd been 3 weeks ago, trusting, naive Nora, would have destroyed the phone and preserved the illusion. But that woman had died at 2:23 this morning. The woman sitting at this table, watching the fishing boats head out to sea, had questions that demanded answers. And Doctor, whoever she was, had those answers. I picked up David's phone and turned it on. The phone came alive with notifications, 17 missed calls from Doctor, 43 unread messages. I steadied my breathing and began my investigation. Starting with the contact information, the number had a Portland area code, no address, but buried in their text conversation from 2 months ago. She'd mentioned working at St. Mary's Medical Center. I switched to David's email, my fingers trembling as I typed his password. His inbox revealed a parallel life constructed with meticulous care, restaurant reservations at places I'd suggested we try together, Antonio's, The Pearl, Chez Laurent, each confirmation for 2, under his name. The most recent one, unsettlingly, was for November 18th, 4 days after his funeral. In his photos, I found them. Hundreds of pictures hidden in a folder innocuously named Medical Conferences. Doctor, Emily Rhodes. I finally had her full name from a conference badge in one photo. Cardiologist, like David. They were at medical dinners, on beach walks, sharing wine in what looked like an apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. In every image, David looked alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. One photo stopped me cold. The background was unmistakable. The inn at Cannon Beach, where we'd celebrated our 25th anniversary. Same room, possibly. Same balcony where we'd watched the sunset. The date stamp, last Valentine's Day, when he'd claimed to be attending a symposium in Boston. I found the credit card statements next. The separate account he'd said was for business showed the truth. Monthly charges at Bailey's Jewelers, women's clothing stores, a lingerie boutique, $5,000 at a furniture store last spring. I cross-referenced the date, the same week he'd said the hospital needed him to cover extra shifts. The lease agreement was in his cloud storage, a 2-bedroom apartment in Portland's Pearl District, signed 8 months ago. David Walker and Emily Rhodes, co-tenants. The monthly rent was more than our mortgage. They'd been building a life together while I folded his laundry and kept his dinner warm. My phone rang, Susan checking on me. I let it go to voicemail. What would I say? I'm fine, just discovering my dead husband's double life. The widow's role I'd been playing suddenly felt like a costume I needed to shed. I returned to their messages, forcing myself to read everything. The evolution was clear. 2 years ago, professional exchanges about shared patients, then jokes, mild flirting disguised as collegiality. By last Christmas, full-blown declarations of love. Nora doesn't understand me anymore. He'd written, "We're like roommates. You deserve to be happy." She'd replied, "We both do." Roommates, 35 years reduced to a living arrangement. There were logistics discussed with chilling practicality. He would ask for a divorce after the holidays. He'd already consulted a lawyer. I found that email too. From a firm in Portland, they'd advised him on asset protection, on how to minimize alimony. He'd been strategizing his exit while I planned our retirement trips. The final thread was from the night he died. David, heading out soon. Can't wait to see you. Emily, drive safe. I have something important to tell you. David, good important or bad important? Emily, the best kind of important. That was 6:07 a.m. By 6:30, he was in the ambulance. I sat back, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of deception. This wasn't a fling, a moment of weakness. This was a calculated dismantling of our life together. Every "I love you" in the last 2 years had been a lie. Every family dinner where he'd smiled and asked about the grandchildren while texting her under the table. Every night he'd slept beside me while dreaming of another woman. The investigative part of my brain, the part that had earned a master's degree before babies changed my trajectory, began organizing information. I screenshotted everything, emailed copies to myself, created folders labeled by date and type of evidence. If David thought I was just a naive housewife who'd accept whatever story he'd eventually planned to tell, he'd underestimated me one final time. I found myself on St. Mary's website, staring at Emily Rhodes' professional headshot, accomplished cardiologist, published researcher, divorced with 2 teenage sons. The website noted her specialties included patient-centered care and medical ethics. The irony was suffocating. Her LinkedIn revealed more. Johns Hopkins Medical School, residency at Cleveland Clinic, moved to Portland 4 years ago. Dozens of mutual connections with David, conferences they'd both attended. Had everyone known but me? Were we the subject of hospital gossip, the cliché of the older doctor leaving his wife for a younger colleague? I checked David's GPS history, another violation of the privacy I'd always respected. The apartment address appeared regularly, sometimes for overnight stays I believed were on-call shifts. Our favorite Italian restaurant showed up dated 2 weeks ago, when I'd been visiting Lauren and the grandchildren in Seattle. He'd taken her to our place. The deepest cut came in an email folder labeled Future Plans. They'd been looking at houses together, not just any houses, beachfront properties in Manzanita, where we'd honeymooned, where we'd talked about renewing our vows for our 40th anniversary. 5 saved listings, all with his notes about perfect for our fresh start. By 8 a.m., I had 63 pages of evidence and a rage that felt volcanic, but beneath the anger was something else, cold clarity. David was beyond my reach now, insulated by death from the confrontation he deserved, but Emily Rhodes was very much alive, waiting for messages from a ghost, probably checking her phone between patients. I pulled up her latest text. "David, I'm scared. Please just let me know you're okay. I can't lose you now." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. One message. That's all it would take to shatter her world the way mine had been shattered. But not yet. First, I needed to understand the full scope of what they built together. Then I would decide what to do with the ruins. I switched off David's phone and stood up, my body stiff from hours of hunching over evidence. Outside, the world carried on as if nothing had changed. Fishermen selling their morning catch, tourists taking photos of the lighthouse, ordinary people living their ordinary lives. But I was no longer ordinary. I was a woman with 63 pages of proof that my life had been a performance, and the show was finally over. 3 days of preparation led to this moment. I sat in the corner booth of Pete's Coffee, directly across from St. Mary's Medical Center's main entrance, wearing the kind of forgettable clothes that made women my age invisible beige cardigan, reading glasses on a chain, sensible shoes. A medical journal lay open before me, the perfect prop for a hospital waiting room regular. I'd studied Emily Rhodes' schedule like a final exam. She had clinic hours until noon, surgery in the afternoon, and always, according to 3 days of observation, stopped here for a cappuccino at 12:15, precise, punctual, predictable. Just the kind of woman David would have found irresistible after decades of my spontaneous chaos. At 12:14, I saw her emerge from the hospital's glass doors, even from across the street. Her confidence was unmistakable. Navy dress under her white coat, heels that clicked authority with every step, dark hair pulled back in a twist that probably took 5 minutes but looked effortless. Everything I'd stopped being years ago when comfort became more important than impression. She entered the coffee shop with the familiarity of routine, nodding to the barista who already knew her order. I kept my eyes on the journal, peripheral vision tracking her movement to the pickup counter. When she turned with her cappuccino, our eyes met. The recognition was instant and mutual. Her face drained of color so quickly I thought she might faint. The cup trembled in her hand, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. For a heartbeat, we were frozen. The mistress and the widow, finally occupying the same space. Emily Rhodes, the accomplished cardiologist who'd performed surgeries on hundreds of hearts, looked like she wanted to run, but she was trapped between pride and panic, between the counter and the door, between her professional persona and the personal disaster standing before her in sensible shoes. I remained perfectly still, letting her make the choice. Run or confront, flee or face. She chose neither. Instead, she walked to a table as far from mine as possible, sat down with rigid precision, and pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, texting someone, her lawyer, a friend. Her hands shook so badly she had to set the phone down. I gathered my things slowly, deliberately, and walked to her table, up close. I could see the details David must have loved, the delicate gold necklace with a small pearl, the French manicure, the way her jawline stayed sharp despite being 56. She was beautiful in that maintained way that required effort and money, and caring what people thought. "Dr. Rhodes," I said, sitting down uninvited, "I believe we have something to discuss." She couldn't meet my eyes. "Mrs. Walker, Nora," I interrupted. "After all, you've been sleeping with my husband for 2 years. I think we're past formalities." Her cappuccino sat untouched, a foam heart on top mocking us both. I don't know what to say. "How about starting with the truth? Novel concept, I know." She finally looked up, and I saw tears pooling in her green eyes. Part of me, the part that had spent 40 years being nice, accommodating, understanding, wanted to hand her a tissue, but that woman was gone. "He said you were separated," she whispered, "living separate lives." "Separate lives?" I laughed, sharp and bitter. "We shared a bed, had dinner together every night he wasn't with you, made love." I watched her flinch. "Oh, did he tell you we weren't intimate?" "Another lie, I'm afraid." "That's not... he wouldn't..." "June 15th, I said, pulling out my phone to show her my calendar. "My birthday. He brought me breakfast in bed. We made love. Then he apparently drove to Portland to see you. Still smell like me. Did he?" She pushed back from the table, but I wasn't finished. "The inn at Cannon Beach, Valentine's Day, room 212, the same room where we celebrated our 25th anniversary. Did he mention that when he was..." "Stop!" Her voice cracked. "Please." "Why? Did David stop when I asked him to slow down? To spend more time at home? Did you stop when you knew he was married?" "He was going to leave you." She said it like a defense, like a justification that made it all acceptable. After the holidays, he'd already seen a lawyer. I know. I've read everything. Every text, every email, every credit card statement for the apartment you shared, the one furnished with my retirement savings. Now she did run, or tried to. She stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor, drawing stares from other patrons. But her legs betrayed her, wobbling in those expensive heels, and she had to grip the table for support. "Careful," I said. "Wouldn't want you to fall, though I suppose you're already quite experienced at that." She sank back into the chair, and suddenly she looked older, tired, like someone who'd been holding her breath for weeks. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" I considered the question. "I want my husband back. I want 40 years of marriage not to be a lie. I want to unknow what I know. But since none of that's possible, I'll settle for understanding why." "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. He made me laugh. Really laugh, not just polite doctor's lounge chuckles. He'd text me terrible medical puns during surgery. He'd dance with me in my kitchen to songs from the 80s. She stopped, realizing she was describing my husband to me. "He did that with me too," I said quietly, "once." "He loved you." She said it like an accusation. "He talked about you all the time at first, how smart you were, how you'd given up your career for the family, how guilty he felt, but then..." "Then what?" "Then he said you'd stopped seeing him, that you looked through him like he was furniture, that you'd both been pretending for so long you'd forgotten what was real." Each word was a small knife, precise and sharp, because buried under all the lies was a grain of truth. When had I stopped really looking at David? When had our conversations become logistics bills and schedules and grandchildren's birthdays? When had we stopped dancing in the kitchen? But that didn't excuse this. Nothing excused this. "I need you to know something," I said, leaning forward. "The morning David died, he was coming to you. He kissed me goodbye, habit, I suppose, and got in his car to drive to another woman. He had a massive heart attack in our driveway. I held his hand in the ambulance. I was the one who heard his last words. I was the one who closed his eyes." She was crying now, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "And while I was choosing his casket, planning his funeral, comforting our children, you were texting his phone, 67 messages, doctor, roads, I counted, declarations of love to a dead man while his wife was picking out funeral flowers. I didn't know..." "No. You didn't know a lot of things. You didn't know he snored. You didn't know he was terrified of spiders. You didn't know he cried when Michael was born. You didn't know he still had nightmares about losing his first patient. You knew the David he wanted you to see. I knew the real man, all of him, even the parts that were capable of this betrayal." I stood, feeling suddenly exhausted. "Keep the apartment. Keep the furniture he bought you. Keep whatever illusion you need to maintain. But know this, you were an escape route, not a destination. And now you're just the other woman at a dead man's ghost story." I left her there, crying into her cold cappuccino, and walked back into the noon sunshine. My phone buzzed. Lauren checking on me. Michael sending photos of the grandkids, life, continuing its relentless forward motion. But something had shifted in that coffee shop. The confrontation I'd imagined 100 different ways had given me no satisfaction, no closure, just a hollow understanding that we'd all lost. David had died running from one life to another, leaving both women stranded in the wreckage of his choices. I sat in my car for a long time, watching Emily Rhodes finally emerge from the coffee shop, moving like someone who'd aged years in minutes. She looked up at the hospital, then down at her phone, lost between her professional world and the personal ruins she'd helped create. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The email arrived at 10:30 5 days after our coffee shop encounter. I'd been expecting some form of contact, but not this. A formal message from a generic Gmail account with the subject line, We need to talk. Dear Nora, I've thought about our conversation every day since Tuesday. You deserve more than the fragments of truth you've pieced together. If you're willing, I'd like to meet again. Not to excuse anything, but to give you the answers you said you wanted. There's a rose garden in Peninsula Park that's been abandoned since the city budget cuts. No one goes there anymore. Sunday at 2 p.m. Emily Rhodes. I read it 3 times, parsing every word for manipulation or agenda. The abandoned rose garden was an interesting choice. Public enough to be safe. Private enough for difficult truths. I wondered if she'd taken David there, then pushed the thought away. That way lay madness. Sunday arrived gray and drizzling. Typical November weather that kept most people indoors. I found the garden easily, a forgotten corner of the park where roses grew wild and untended, their last blooms struggling against the approaching winter. Emily was already there, sitting on a bench that had seen better decades, wearing jeans and a rain jacket, without her doctor's coat and polished appearance. She looked younger, more vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," she said as I approached. I sat on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining distance. Talk. She pulled out an envelope, thick with folded papers. "David wrote this the week before he died. He was going to give it to you after Thanksgiving." She held it out, but I didn't take it. "Read it to me." She hesitated, then unfolded the pages with careful hands. "My dearest Nora." His handwriting? She showed me. It was unmistakably David's, the same messy doctor's scrawl that had annotated 40 years of birthday cards. Continue. "My dearest Nora, by the time you read this, I will have shattered the life we built together. There are no words adequate for the pain I'm about to cause you, but I owe you an explanation, not excuses." I fell in love with Emily gradually, then suddenly, the way Hemingway described going bankrupt. It started with shared patience, evolved into friendship, and became something I never intended. But this letter isn't about Emily. It's about us, and how we became strangers living in the same house. Do you remember the last time we really talked? Not about the kids or the bills or what needed fixing, but really talked. I've been trying to remember, and I can't. Somewhere between raising children and building careers and becoming grandparents. We stopped seeing each other. We became expert at being married without being present. I take full responsibility for my cowardice. Instead of fighting for us, I ran. Instead of telling you I was lonely in our marriage, I found comfort elsewhere. Instead of suggesting counseling, I consulted lawyers. I chose the easy wrong over the difficult right. You deserved honesty. You deserved the chance to fight for us or to let me go with dignity. Instead, I've been slowly extracting myself from our life like a coward removing a bandage. I want you to know that Emily didn't pursue me. I pursued her. She resisted for months, knowing I was married. I told her we were essentially separated, living parallel lives. By the time I said it, I'd convinced myself it was true. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to remember that the man who betrayed you was also the man who loved you completely for many years. That love was real, even if it got lost. The children we raised, the home we built, the thousands of small kindnesses we shared, none of that was a lie. I hope someday... Stop. I couldn't hear anymore. My chest felt tight, like I was having my own heart attack. 40 years of compressed emotion demanding release. Emily folded the letter, placing it on the bench between us. There are 3 more pages. Why didn't he just talk to me? The question came out as a whisper. Why didn't he say any of this when it mattered? He was afraid, she said simply. Afraid of hurting you. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of discovering you felt the same way about the marriage. David avoided difficult emotions like they were contagious. I laughed bitterly. But not with you. No, she admitted. With me. He could be the person he wanted to be, not the person he'd been for 40 years. There was no history to navigate, no patterns to break. It was easier. Easier. I tested the word, found it wanting. My mother used to say the easy path rarely leads anywhere worth going. We sat in silence, watching rain create tiny rivers in the garden's neglected paths. Finally. I asked the question that had haunted me since finding their messages. What was the important thing you needed to tell him? The morning he died? Emily's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. I was pregnant. The world tilted. I gripped the bench, feeling splinters dig into my palms. Was? Miscarriage. 3 days after the funeral. Her voice was flat, emotionless. I was 46. It was unlikely to begin with. The stress of David's death, the guilt, not knowing what to do. My body made the decision for me. I stared at her. This woman who'd nearly become the mother of my husband's child, the absurdity of it all. David starting over with a new family at 70 should have been laughable. Instead, it was just another layer of tragedy in an already unbearable situation. Did he know about the pregnancy? No, I just found out that morning. That's why I texted about having something important to tell him. She pulled her jacket tighter. I've wondered every day if knowing would have changed anything, if he'd have driven more carefully, or if the stress would have triggered the heart attack sooner. I picked up the letter, feeling its weight. What do you want from me, Emily? Absolution, understanding? I can't give you either. I want you to know that he loved you, even while loving me. He loved you. It destroyed him, living that contradiction. It destroyed me, too. The difference is, I'm still here to feel it. She stood abruptly. I'm leaving Portland. I've taken a position at Mayo Clinic. I need to be somewhere that doesn't remind me of him every day. Running away, how very like David. Maybe, or maybe it's the first honest thing I've done in 2 years. She turned to go, then stopped. For what it's worth, Nora, you were the love of his life. I was just the epilogue he never got to finish. I watched her walk away through the abandoned roses, her figure blurring in the rain until she disappeared entirely. Then I unfolded David's letter and read the remaining pages alone, letting his words wash over me like rain on dying flowers. He'd ended with, if I could do it all again, I'd choose you every time. I just choose to be better at loving you. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my purse. Then I stood and walked out of the garden, leaving the ghosts of 2 broken love stories among the untended roses. Emily Rhodes would go to Minnesota and try to forget. I would go home to Oregon and try to remember, not the David who betrayed me, but the one who'd loved me imperfectly but truly for so many years. But first, I had one more thing to do. Justice might be beyond reach, but accountability was not. The Oregon Medical Board office sat in a gleaming tower in downtown Portland, all glass and steel efficiency. I dressed carefully for this meeting. Professional Navy suit, minimal jewelry, the kind of outfit that said respectable widow rather than vengeful wife. In my leather portfolio, I carried 63 pages of evidence organized with the precision of my former librarian self. I'd spent 2 weeks preparing after the Rose Garden meeting, not in a frenzy of rage, but with methodical determination. Screenshots printed and annotated, credit card statements highlighted, text messages arranged chronologically, a timeline that showed exactly when Dr. Emily Rhodes had begun treating my husband as more than a patient referral source. The investigator, Miss Patricia Harmon, was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes behind designer glasses. She reviewed my complaint form without expression. Mrs. Walker, I need to be clear about our process. We investigate violations of medical ethics, not personal relationships. I understand, and I open my portfolio, which is why I'm focusing on Dr. Rhodes' breach of professional boundaries with a patient's spouse, the use of hospital resources to facilitate an inappropriate relationship, and potential violations of patient confidentiality. I laid out the evidence systematically, text messages sent during work hours from hospital IP addresses, dinner receipts that corresponded with medical conferences they'd both attended, paid for with David's hospital credit card, most damning emails where Emily had discussed my health information, gleaned from David, including medications I was taking and a minor surgery I'd had 3 years ago. She wrote, and I quote, Your wife's anxiety medication explains a lot about your home situation. That's a HIPAA violation, isn't it? Discussing a patient's medical information without consent. Miss, Harmon's expression shifted slightly. You were Dr. Rhodes' patient. No, but my husband had access to my medical records through the hospital system. He shared that information with Dr. Rhodes, who then used it to make assessments about my mental state and our marriage. I showed her more emails where Emily had offered medical opinions about me based on secondhand information, suggested I might be depressed, possibly menopausal, potentially in need of counseling. All of this while she was sleeping with my husband. There's also this. I produced hospital schedules I'd obtained through a sympathetic friend who worked in administration. 17 occasions where Dr. Rhodes altered the on-call schedule to ensure she and my husband had the same shifts. Nights when other doctors had to cover additional hours so they could be together. Miss Harmon took notes in precise shorthand. How did you obtain these schedules? They're publicly posted for staff access. A friend printed them for me. I'd been careful to stay within legal bounds. There's also the matter of the apartment. I showed her the lease agreement, signed during work hours, at the hospital, using a hospital computer. The PDF metadata confirms this. They were conducting personal business, setting up a residence together, while being paid by the hospital. A Mrs. Walker. Miss Harmon set down her pen. I have to ask, what outcome are you hoping for here? I'd thought about this question every night for 2 weeks. I want accountability. My husband is beyond consequences, but Dr. Rhodes violated professional ethics. She used her position to engage in behavior that caused harm. If she'd been having an affair with a patient instead of a colleague, wouldn't there be consequences? That's different. Is it? She took an oath to do no harm. She knew David was married. She participated in deception that caused immense psychological damage to a family. She discussed my private medical information without my consent, at minimum. That deserves investigation. I pulled out my final piece of evidence, a letter from my therapist documenting the severe anxiety and depression I'd experienced since discovering the affair. Harm was done, quantifiable medical harm. Miss Harmon gathered the papers, scanning each one with professional interest. We'll need to verify these documents. Of course. Everything is exactly as I found it. I've made copies for my records. This process can take several months. Are you prepared for that? I've waited 40 years to learn my marriage was a fraud. I can wait a few more months for justice. She stood, indicating our meeting was over. We'll be in touch if we need additional information. I should warn you, even if violations are found, the consequences vary widely. It might be a warning, required ethics training, supervision requirements, or license suspension. In severe cases involving patient harm or ethical breaches, yes, but that's not for me to determine. I shook her hand, noting her grip was firm but not unkind. As I turned to leave, she spoke again. Mrs. Walker? I'm sorry for your loss, both of them. I nodded, understanding. I'd lost my husband twice, once to another woman, once to death. But I was done being the victim in this story. Outside, Portland's November rain had started again. I sat in my car and called Susan. It's done. I filed the complaint. How do you feel? I considered the question like I'm finally fighting back. David's gone, but his ghost doesn't get to haunt me quietly, and Emily Rhodes doesn't get to walk away without consequences. Good for you. Wine tonight? Make it whiskey. I drove home through the rain, thinking about Emily packing for Minnesota, probably believing she could leave all this behind, but I'd ensured that her professional record would follow her, that any hospital doing due diligence would find the complaint. She'd have to explain, again and again, why she'd been investigated for ethical violations. It wasn't the total destruction she'd wrought on my life, but it was something, a small measure of justice in a situation that would never be fair. Back home, I filed my copies of everything in a box marked David's Lies and put it in the attic. Then I went to his study and began the long overdue process of packing away 40 years of artifacts from a marriage that had been dying long before he found Emily Rhodes. In his desk drawer, I found a receipt from a jewelry store dated 3 weeks before he died, a necklace. The description read, "White gold with pearls." I thought of Emily's delicate necklace in the coffee shop and felt the last small hope that maybe I'd misunderstood something die away. My phone buzzed, an email from Miss Harmon's office confirming receipt of my complaint and outlining next steps. The wheel was in motion now. Whatever came next, I'd set it spinning. I poured myself a generous measure of David's good scotch, the bottle he'd been saving for a special occasion that would never come, and raised a toast to the empty room. "To accountability," I said aloud, "and to whatever comes next." The official letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, 4 months after I'd filed the complaint. I'd been working in the garden, coaxing new life from soil that had been neglected during David's illness and my subsequent discovery. My hands were deep in earth when Susan appeared on the back porch, holding the certified mail envelope like it might explode. "Oregon Medical Board," she said simply. I washed my hands slowly, deliberately, preparing myself for disappointment. I'd learned not to expect justice from systems designed to protect their own. But as I read the letter, my muddy fingerprints smudging the edges, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: vindication. "Dear Mrs. Walker, following a thorough investigation of your complaint against Dr. Emily Rhodes, license hash MD 47,829, the Oregon Medical Board has reached the following determinations." The language was formal, clinical, but the findings were damning: violation of professional boundaries, misuse of hospital resources, breach of patient confidentiality standards, conduct detrimental to the integrity of the medical profession. The board has voted to suspend Dr. Rhodes' medical license for a period of 6 months, followed by 2 years of supervised practice with quarterly ethics reviews. Additionally, Dr. Rhodes is required to complete 100 hours of professional ethics training and pay a fine of $50,000. But it was the next paragraph that made me sink into a kitchen chair. Furthermore, St. Mary's Medical Center has been notified of these findings. In correspondence dated March 12th, the hospital confirmed that Dr. Rhodes' employment was terminated effective February 28th for violations of hospital policy regarding professional conduct. Susan read over my shoulder, whistling low. "She's finished in Portland. Minnesota, too, probably." I thought of Emily's plan to start fresh at Mayo Clinic. They'll run a background check. Find this suspension. No reputable hospital will touch her for years. "How do you feel?" I considered the question that had become Susan's refrain these past months. Not happy, not sad, just balanced, like the scales finally evened out a bit. My phone buzzed. Lauren calling from Seattle. "Mom, did you see the news about St. Mary's?" "What news?" "There's an article in the Oregonian about a doctor being disciplined for an inappropriate relationship. They don't name names, but the details. Mom, was this Dad's doctor?" I closed my eyes. Of course it would make the news. Hospital scandals always did. Yes. Oh my God. Is this why Dad was there so much? Were they? Yes. Silence. Then, "I'm coming down. Michael too. We'll be there by dinner." "You don't need to." "We're coming." The conversation I dreaded was finally here. How do you tell your children their father was planning to leave? How do you preserve their memories while acknowledging the truth? By 6 p.m., my kitchen was full. Lauren and her husband, Paul, Michael and his wife, Jennifer, even my grandchildren, though the youngest were occupied with tablets in the living room. I'd made David's famous lasagna, the irony not lost on me as I served his signature dish while preparing to dismantle his memory. "Tell us everything," and Michael said, ever the direct one. So I did. The phone, the messages, the investigation. I showed them David's letter, watched their faces crumble as they read their father's words. Lauren cried. Michael got angry. Their spouses looked uncomfortable. unsure whether to comfort or retreat. "I don't understand," Lauren kept saying. "You and Dad were perfect. You were the couple everyone wanted to be." "We were good at performing marriage," I said gently. "Maybe too good. We forgot it wasn't supposed to be a performance." "So what? He just gets to die and leave us with this mess?" Michael's anger needed a target, but David was beyond reach. "He left us with the truth, finally." We talked until midnight, cycling through grief and rage and confusion. The grandchildren sensed the tension, requiring careful explanations about why everyone was sad. "Grandpa made some mistakes. I told them, but he loved all of us very much. Even now, I couldn't destroy him completely in their eyes." After everyone left, I sat alone with the medical board letter. Emily Rhodes had lost her career, her reputation, her future in medicine. The mighty doctor brought low by her own choices, but I felt no satisfaction, only a tired sense of completion. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number, against my better judgment. I opened it. "I know you're behind this. I've lost everything, my career, my home, my reputation. I hope you're satisfied. I started to type a response, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. "Finally," I wrote. "I lost everything too. The difference is, I didn't choose it. I hope you learn from this what David never could, that actions have consequences, even when you think love justifies them, especially then." I blocked the number before she could respond. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, I woke to find an email from the hospital where I'd volunteered for years. They'd heard about my situation. Gossip travels fast in medical communities, and wondered if I'd consider joining their patient advocacy program. "We need someone who understands the human side of medical ethics," the director wrote. I read it twice, then smiled. Maybe this was how you moved forward, not by forgetting the past, but by using it to help others navigate their own medical mysteries and betrayals. I accepted the position that afternoon. It felt right, turning my pain into purpose, ensuring other families wouldn't be blindsided by the people they trusted most. That evening, I stood in my garden where new shoots pushed through dark soil. The letter from the medical board lay on my kitchen table. Official vindication in black and white. Emily Rhodes was packing for a diminished future in Minnesota. Her medical license suspended. Her reputation in ruins. David's ghost had been exposed for what he was, neither devil nor saint. Just a flawed man who'd chosen the easy wrong over the difficult right. And me? I was still here, still standing, still growing, like the garden that refused to die despite a season of neglect. The scales weren't fully balanced. They never could be when one person was beyond justice's reach, but they were level enough for me to stop looking backward and start facing forward. Emily Rhodes would serve her suspension, complete her ethics training, and spend years rebuilding her career under scrutiny. I would rebuild too, but on my own terms. No supervision required, no board oversight, no official judgment, just a woman approaching 70, finally free from the performance of a marriage that had ended long before death made it official. The victory was quiet, private, mine alone, but it was enough. It was finally enough. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen preparing dinner for one, a ritual that had transformed from lonely necessity into cherished solitude. The radio played Ella Fitzgerald, and I moved to the music, chopping vegetables with the rhythm of someone who'd finally learned to dance alone. The certified letter from the law firm had arrived that morning. Final settlement from the civil suit against Emily Rhodes' malpractice insurance. $200,000, the price tag for professional misconduct, emotional distress, and breach of confidentiality. Money couldn't buy back 40 years of marriage or erase the betrayal, but it could buy freedom. I'd already earmarked half for the Sunrise Center, a local nonprofit supporting women over 60 who were starting over, widowed, divorced, or simply ready for change. The director had been thrilled. "This will fund our job training program for 2 years, Mrs. Walker." "Call me Nora," I'd said, "and I'd like to volunteer as a mentor, if you'll have me." The other half would go toward my own new beginning. I'd enrolled in Portland State's graduate program in counseling, focusing on grief and betrayal recovery. At 70, I was the oldest student in my cohort, but also the one with the most relevant life experience. My phone buzzed, a photo from Michael. He and Jennifer were at the beach with the kids, building sandcastles. Lauren had sent one earlier from her garden, finally planting the roses she'd been promising to tend for years. My children were healing, slowly accepting that their father had been both the man who loved them and the man who'd betrayed their mother. Complex truths for a complex world. I donated David's medical books to the hospital library, but kept one, a first edition, Gray's Anatomy he'd bought at the same bookstore where we'd met. Inside the front cover, his younger self had written, "To understanding the heart in all its complexities." D. Dallaire, 1985. The irony was perfect enough to preserve. The doorbell rang. Susan stood on my porch with a bottle of champagne and her signature grin. "Happy Liberation Day." I laughed. "That's not a real holiday." "It is now. 1 year since you found out the truth. I hereby declare it worthy of celebration." We sat on the back deck, watching the sun set over the harbor. The lighthouse beam began its eternal rotation, marking time as it always had, indifferent to human drama. "Any word from Minnesota?" Susan asked carefully. "Nothing direct, but I heard through the medical grapevine that she's working at a rural clinic, doing basic care under supervision. No surgeries, no prestigious positions, just general practice in a town of 3,000 people. Quite a fall from grace. Or maybe a chance to remember why she became a doctor in the first place." I surprised myself with the generosity of the thought. I hope she learned something from it. "You've changed," Susan observed. "The Nora from a year ago would have hoped she suffered forever. That Nora was still in shock. This one has had time to think." I sipped champagne, feeling the bubbles dance on my tongue. Holding on to hate is like chemotherapy, sometimes necessary to kill what's poisoning you, but deadly if you don't stop in time. We sat in comfortable silence until the stars emerged. Then Susan raised her glass. "To second acts." "To third acts," I corrected. "The first was my childhood. The second was my marriage. This is Act 3, and I'm writing it myself." The next morning, I woke early and drove to the cemetery. I hadn't been since the funeral. Unable to face the granite lie of beloved husband carved in stone. But today felt different. I placed a single rose on David's grave, not for the husband who'd betrayed me, but for the young resident who'd made me laugh in a bookstore. That version of David deserved to be mourned. "I'm okay," I told the stone. "The kids are okay. Emily, well, she's paying her dues. And me, I'm learning to be Nora without the Ann David attached. Turns out I like her." Back home, I found a package on my doorstep. No return address, but I recognized Emily's handwriting. Inside was David's watch, the Rolex I'd given him for our 25th anniversary. A note was attached. "This belongs with his family. I'm sorry for everything. E.R." I held the watch, feeling its familiar weight, then walked to my jewelry box and placed it inside. Someday I'd give it to Michael, when the pain had faded enough to make it just a watch again. That evening, I cooked myself a perfect dinner: seared salmon, roasted vegetables, a glass of good wine. I set the table properly, used the china we'd saved for special occasions, lit candles, because I was done waiting for special. Every day I chose myself was special enough. After dinner, I put on music, not the classical David had preferred, but the jazz I'd always loved. I danced in my kitchen, a 70-year-old woman spinning in stockings on hardwood floors, finally free from the weight of someone else's secrets. The song ended, and I stood breathless and laughing in my empty house that no longer felt empty. It felt full of possibility, of future, of the life I'd almost missed while performing the role of perfect wife. My phone buzzed with a text from my granddaughter. "Grandma, Mom says you're going back to school. That's so cool. Can you help me with my psychology homework?" I smiled, typing back, "Of course. Sweetheart, turns out your grandma knows a thing or two about the human heart." I poured another glass of wine and stepped out onto the deck. The lighthouse beam swept past, illuminating the water for a moment before moving on. Just like truth, I thought, it arrives in flashes, illuminating what was always there, waiting in the darkness. He took years from me, I said to the ocean, to the stars, to myself, but I just took the rest of my life back. And with that declaration, I raised my glass to the night sky, toasting my own resurrection. Emily Rhodes was serving her sentence in professional purgatory. David was beyond judgment or forgiveness. But me, I was magnificently, defiantly, finally alive. The revenge was complete, not in their destruction, but in my rebuilding. The best revenge, it turned out, was a life well lived without them. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with listeners around the world. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your perspectives and experiences make these stories richer for everyone.